Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. We'd been in the house for 3 years before the hole started, long enough to know the yard the way you know any space you maintain, where the drainage went soft in spring, where the grass never quite took along the fence line, which corner the neighbor's cat preferred. We weren't obsessive about the yard, but we knew it, and when something changed in it, we noticed. The first hole appeared on a Wednesday morning in early September on the north side of the house between the foundation and the flower bed, roughly 18 inches across, maybe 2.5 feet deep. The edges clean and the displaced soil piled neatly beside it. Not ragged the way an animal digs when it's after something. Not scattered. Clean. Like something had pressed into the earth in a controlled way and removed what it didn't need. I showed Fen before work. He crouched down and looked at it and said, "Groundhog maybe, or a large skunk," and went inside to get his coffee. I filled it in and went about the day. The next morning, there were 2 more. Same side of the house, same clean edges, same careful displacement of soil. I crouched at the edge of the second one and looked at the angle of it, and that was the first thing that made me set Groundhog aside. The hole didn't go straight down. It went down and inward, angling toward the foundation at roughly 45 degrees, the kind of angle you'd dig if you were trying to get under something rather than simply into the ground. Fen said maybe they were going under the foundation for warmth. I said the foundation was poured concrete and didn't have gaps. He said animals didn't know that. I refilled the 2 holes and watched from the kitchen window that evening until it was too dark to see the yard clearly. Nothing moved out there. No rustling in the flower bed, no shapes crossing the grass. Just the yard the way it always looked at night. Ordinary and still and giving nothing away. In the morning, there were 3 more holes. I called a wildlife removal company at the end of the first week, by which point there were 7 holes on the north side, all of them angled inward, all of them within 3 feet of the foundation. The man who came out walked the north side twice and crouched at each hole and spent a long time not saying anything. He had the manner of someone building up to admitting something and working out how to do it professionally. He asked if I'd seen any animal activity in the yard at night, and I said no. He asked if I'd heard any sounds, and I said no. He looked at the angle of the holes again and said the angle was unusual and that most animals digging for shelter went straight down or followed the gradient away from a structure, not toward it. His voice had the careful neutrality of someone who didn't want to say they didn't know what they were looking at. He set 4 live traps along the north side and told me to call when something was in them. He looked like he expected that to be soon. None of the traps were triggered over the following week, but 2 of them had been moved, lifted from their placement, and set down again a few feet away, with no sign of what had moved them. The bait inside was untouched. The ground around the moved traps showed the same clean disturbance as the holes, a slight depression where something had engaged with the ground beneath the trap, enough to shift it without triggering it. The new holes were on the east side. The east side holes were larger than the north side holes, not dramatically, but enough to notice, and deeper. The displaced soil piles higher beside them, still clean-edged, still angled inward toward the foundation with that same deliberate 45-degree pitch. I refilled the north side holes, and they stayed filled. Whatever was making them had moved on. Fen came outside one evening and stood next to me looking at the east side, and didn't say groundhog this time. He said he'd look at the motion-activated camera options, and I said, okay. And he ordered one, and it arrived in 2 days, and we mounted it on the east corner of the house, pointing at the area with the most holes. The camera triggered every night between roughly 2 and 4 in the morning, which was how we knew the timing. But the footage showed nothing. Motion triggered, camera recording, and the frame was empty. The yard was lit by the camera's infrared, and it was clear and still, and nothing was in it. Not a shadow, not a shape, not a disturbance in the grass moving in real time. But in the morning, there would be a new hole. Fen said the camera's motion sensitivity was probably picking up wind movement in the trees. I pointed out that the trees in the yard didn't move in the footage when the camera triggered. He looked at the footage again and didn't say anything. The holes kept appearing. By the end of the east side stretch, I'd counted 11 holes in 2 weeks. Fen had stopped offering explanations by then. He'd gone quiet in the way he went quiet when he was thinking hard about something he hadn't resolved, doing the dishes or folding laundry with his jaw set and his eyes somewhere else. I appreciated the honesty of it, better than the groundhog theory. The south side started in mid-October. I'd been watching the progression by then, the way the holes had moved from the north face to the east face. And when the south side holes appeared, I understood I was looking at a circuit. Something was working its way around the house, face by face, and the south side was the third stretch of 4. It had covered half the perimeter. I went back to the wildlife removal company. A different person came this time, a woman who had been in the business longer and whose expression when she saw the total hole count was the most unguarded response I'd gotten from any professional we'd contacted. She asked how long this had been going on, and when I told her, she was quiet for a moment. She said she'd never seen a digging pattern like this and asked if we'd noticed anything else unusual, and I said just the holes, and she nodded slowly. The way you nod when the answer to your question confirms something you were hoping it wouldn't. She recommended we have the crawl space inspected to see if anything had breached the foundation. We had an inspector out the following day. He found no breach, no entry point, nothing under the house that shouldn't be there. The foundation was solid. Whatever was digging at 45 degrees toward it from all sides hadn't reached it yet. Fen asked me that night if I thought it was going to reach it. I said I thought it was going to finish the circuit first. He asked what happened after that. I said I didn't know. We sat with that for a while. The house felt different at night now, not visibly different, not in any way I could point to and identify, just different in the way a room feels different after someone has told you something that can't be untold. We'd lived in it for 3 years and felt settled in it, and now it felt like something we were borrowing from something that was in the process of taking it back. The south side holes were coming faster than the previous faces, 2 and 3 in a single night, as if the thing had found its pace or was working with increased urgency. The camera kept triggering on empty frames. We stopped checking the footage daily because it was always the same. Infrared yard, Still trees, no movement, new hole in the morning. The west side started on a Saturday. I stood at the corner of the house and looked from the fresh holes on the west face back around to the north side I'd filled in weeks ago and measured the distance that remained in my head. The west face was the shortest run of the four. Whatever was out there was close to closing the loop. Fen suggested we leave for a week. I said the holes would still be there when we got back. He said he knew, but he wanted a week of not waking up and going outside to find what was new. I understood that entirely and said okay, but I didn't go. I told him to go stay with his sister, and he did, after 2 days of trying to convince me to come. And I stayed in the house alone with the camera footage that showed nothing and the new holes that appeared every morning along the west face of the foundation. I want to be accurate about why I stayed. It wasn't that I couldn't leave. It was that I felt, with the kind of certainty that bypasses rational evaluation, that I needed to be there when the circuit closed. That being present for that moment would tell me something the footage never could. The last west side holes appeared on a Tuesday morning, 8 feet from where the west face met the north face and the original holes had been. The circuit was complete. I walked the full perimeter of the house and counted the refilled holes and the new holes and the spacing between them, and understood that whatever had been working its way around our foundation for 6 weeks had finished what it set out to do. That night, there were no new holes anywhere. The sound started in the crawl space on Wednesday night. Not digging. The digging was done. This was movement, the kind of sound a large animal makes when it's settling into a space, the low compression of something substantial arranging itself, finding its position. It came through the floor, the way structural sounds travel, not loud, not alarming on its own, just consistently there, a presence beneath us that went on for 2 nights and then went quiet on the third. The third night was completely silent. I lay on the bedroom floor with my ear against the hardwood for a long time and heard nothing, and somehow the silence was harder to sit with than the sounds had been. The sounds had been a process in motion. The silence was the process completed. Fen came back on Friday, and I told him what had happened, and he sat at the kitchen table with his hands around a coffee cup and looked at the floor for a long time before he said anything. He asked if I'd checked the crawl space. I told him I'd opened the exterior vent cover and shone a flashlight in on Thursday morning. He asked what I'd seen. The far wall, I told him. The underside of the subfloor. The soil between the foundation piers, which looked undisturbed in the sense that nothing had visibly broken through it, but which was darker than it had been during the inspector's visit, uniformly darker across the whole visible area, the way soil looks when it's been turned and packed back down from below. The smell coming out of the vent had been strong, dense and warm and organic. The smell of deep earth brought close to the surface, old and mineral and wrong, in the specific way that things from far down smell wrong when they reach open air. The flashlight beam had seemed to lose its reach about halfway across the crawl space, less like obstruction, and more like the air itself was thicker in there, resistant to light, in a way air shouldn't be. I hadn't gone in. Fen set his coffee down and said we should go. I said give it a few days. On Monday, Britta from next door knocked and asked if we'd seen animal activity lately. She'd found 3 holes along her south fence line over the weekend. Same clean edges, same unusual depth. She thought something might be going between our yards. I went out and looked at her holes and then came back and looked at ours and worked out the geometry of it. Her holes were on the side of her property closest to our house. The angle of them pointed outward from our foundation, the way spokes point outward from a hub. I asked our neighbor on the other side, a man named Corvin, if he'd had any yard disturbance. He said he'd found a hole 2 nights ago near the shed fence, yes. Thought it was strange because the angle was odd, pointed toward our house rather than away. The thing in our crawl space was expanding outward. Our house was the center point of something. Whatever process had been completed by closing the circuit around our foundation, the next phase was moving in all directions from that point, spreading through the neighborhood, the way something spreads when it's found its anchor and is putting down range. Fen had our bags packed by that evening. We left early the next morning. I drove and Fen sat quiet in the passenger seat, and I looked back once from the end of our street where the road curved slightly uphill before dropping toward the main road. The neighborhood sat in the flat morning light, and from that angle and that elevation, I could see the extent of it in the way you can only see a pattern from above and outside of it. Our house at the center, the surrounding properties with their dark soil disturbances, visible in the low sideways light that catches turned earth differently from settled earth. Britta's yard to the south, Corvin's to the north, the property behind us with 4 or 5 points of disturbance I hadn't known about, and further out, past the first ring of neighbors, 2 more properties on the next street over, just barely visible from where I was, with the same dark points in their grass. In less than 2 weeks, it had reached the second street. I turned back to the road and drove. Fen asked what I'd seen, and I said the neighborhood looked the same as always. He nodded and looked out his window. We both understood what we were doing, and neither of us named it, because naming it would have meant deciding what came next, and we weren't ready for that conversation yet. The mortgage is still in our names. The house is still standing. I think about the crawl space most days, the warmth and the darkness and the soil that had been turned from below and packed back down. And I think about how far the pattern has spread since we left, which streets it's reached now, how many people have found their first hole along a fence line and assumed an animal and filled it in and not thought about it again. I think about the circuit, the patient, deliberate completion of it over 6 weeks, face by face, never random, always angled inward and then outward and then inward again in a widening ring. I don't know what the rings mean when they get wide enough. I'm not sure I want to find out from a distance, which is the only way I'm willing to find out anymore.